When the downtown lights start to come out at night, we go insane, we go insane. And when I arrive, I start to lose my mind. I go insane, I go insane. Cause they told me you take too much. Yeah, I sure do, so I can feel that now. If they only knew how this was, yeah, they would too, just to feel that now. Cause I ain't got no friends, I ain't got nobody. All I got ahead is a moonlit road. I ain't got nobody. All I got ahead is a moonlit road. When the downtown lights start to come out at night, we go insane, we go insane. And when I arrive, I start to lose my mind. I go insane, I go insane. Cause they told me you take too much. Yeah, I sure do, so I can feel that now. If they only knew how this was, yeah, they would too, just to feel that now. Cause I ain't got no friends, I ain't got nobody. All I got ahead is a moonlit road. A moonlit road.
Hello everyone, how are we doing today? Let's do a quick audio check. Let me bring Olaf in, hopefully. Hey, how are you doing today, guys? Anybody in chat? You're getting love from a Sebastian, Olaf. I don't know who that is, but...
Oh, nice. Oh, I like love and warm hugs. So.
If we can do an audio check now, guys. Can you hear me fine? Can you do Olaf fine? Is the music too loud or too little? Input is appreciated.
Nice. I don't hear the music. But
I know we don't hear the music, which is sad now.
It's a shame, right?
Yeah, it's nice to have
dance.
something in the background, but sadly that's the way it is now with this setup. I'll try to work on, we're gonna have more guest streams, so I'll try to work on a better setup. Sounds okay. That's from Scalsex, that probably means it's top tier.
Wow.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Guy would have told us if it was bad, that's for sure. Okay, so I'll just do the quick sponsorship stuff before I introduce Olaf and what we're going to talking about this stream. So first off, huge thanks to BlizzKit, which is the main sponsor of the stream. BlizzKit provides evasion tooling in the form of MacroPack Pro and Shellcode Pack, which you can use for your pentest and red team engagements to wrap up your payloads to bypass initial EDR detection. I know that terminology in its own is very hyped now. What is detection and what is not detection, right? But at least the initial one you can bypass with those two tools, and you get 5% off those tools if you use the code FLANK24. So go check that out. Also, we got a new sponsorship deal with Asire VPN, which and don't call me a hypocrite for this. I've been jamming about that I wouldn't do VPNs and whatnot, but there's one VPN company that I would actually accept, and I reached out to them like a year ago. That was Asire VPN. They're very much like Mulva, they're Sweden-based, they're really transparent, they're privacy first. They go into great technical depth on their website on how they run the hardware, how they deploy it. And you can really see that by, actually it's one of their negative and positive things. You can see that by the low count of servers they have. They don't have 899 servers across the world, and at the same time try to tell you that, you know, this is privacy first and no log bullshit. Obviously it's not if you have 900 EPS deployed, right? They run their own hardware, they deploy their own hardware. Check out the Asire VPN, and today's giveaway is actually going to be a coupon code for 1 month free for Asire VPN. So that's it. Not going to talk more about that. Don't want to fill your heads with it. Let's go into the fun stuff instead. So with me on stream today, I have Olaf Hartong, which is my, how should I word this? My either second or first favorite Dutch. Cas van Koot is probably going to kill me if I say first, but for now, let's go with my favorite Dutch
today
guy.
I'm first, right?
Today you're 100% today.
Make us
Since
cry.
you're on stream, yeah. Since you said yes to come on stream, you're my favorite Dutch individual today, Olaf.
Perfect.
So I
Thanks,
think most of you guys probably know him, but if not, let's just do a quick introduction, Olaf, of who you are and yeah.
So yeah, easy enough. I think I do a lot of detection engineering things. I did a lot with Sysmons, still do it a little bit. Should do a little bit more. That probably was my first open source project that I did, so like a whole modular thing. Now I spend way more time on figuring out how EDRs work or other security solutions, try to reverse it a little bit, and yeah, I do all kinds of other fun detection and purple team things. I don't do red teaming. I sometimes maybe help out a little bit or try to build some tools for them very recently, but apart from that, you don't want me in a red team. It would be messy.
I'm sure it would give great insights into what possible detections lies ahead, having like a purple team individual or even blue team on the red team. And that's why yes. I know, like, I think some of the absolute most talented operators out there are people who did blue side first and then went into red teaming, because they have so much insight into what they're dealing with when it comes to like a modern landscape.
Yeah, I agree. And the other way around as well. We have a couple of guys in the team that used to be red teamers. They got sick of breaking stuff the whole time, and now they do defensive work. It's crazy good. Yeah,
probably
because
like
they know how the deal works, right? And it's the same the other way around. I sometimes sit in on the red teams. And then occasionally I can actually say, like, hey, this is probably not detected, you can do that, don't worry about it. Or maybe you should try this, that's less likely to get detected. So that definitely helps.
I guess that really puts the nail on, hammer on the nail in terms of red teaming, at least from like an operation standpoint, is just guessing, going along and then guessing. Will this get detected? Can I do this? What's the likelihood of this getting me caught? Right? Because you never know. in very few instances you actually know like the full extent of a company's detection capabilities. So that's we're already sidetracking. Like 2 minutes in, 10 minutes in, and we're already sidetracking on detection. Awesome.
Perfect.
I would say that your company is probably very well known, Falcon Force, right? I mean,
Yeah, well,
I would
hopefully.
say so, at least to me.
We do both, right? So we started almost 4.5 years ago, doing red and blue definitely. So we do a lot of the more advanced red teams, and out of that we also started doing purple, which is sometimes a little bit slower to do. But after every red team, we do a couple of days of purple with clients, where we actually also bring, well, either me or one of my blue colleagues, where we can help the blue team figure out what the red team did, how they can detect it. Sometimes we even give them some detectors if we know the product that they use. It's like, hey, we did this, run this query, you can actually find what we did. And on the blue side, we do a lot of detection engineering and SOC maturity development. As long as it's technical, we'll do it, and it's fun.
So I think somebody in chat, base 31337 asked if you're going to Troopers, or if anybody's going to Troopers, and I think you're speaking at Troopers next week, right?
I'm speaking at Troopers, yeah. So the Tuesday I'll drive down there together with Dirk-Jan, who I actually will speak with.
Oh,
so
awesome.
we did some research on, he's Mr. Active Directory and Entra ID, or Azure AD, I still like to call it. And we did some research on the Mac side, on how they implement primary refresh tokens there. So that's going to be a fun talk. Interesting as well. I think we found the bugs 1.5 years ago, and did some
Still present.
some basic. Yeah, and then we wanted to build a talk out of it. So we submitted it to Troopers. We got accepted. Then we finished the research, and we figured, okay, out of politeness, we should also mention it to Microsoft. So we submitted it to MSRC, thinking that it would be, I don't know, serious, but not anything that they would be panicking about. Turns out we're wrong. So basically the bottom line was, can you please not talk about this because it's a critical thing? So we have a talk, so we need to figure out a way. So we'll talk about most of it, just not the most critical bit, and the rest we can still show and demo and these kinds of things. But it was kind of cool. We found a way how they implemented on Mac, where you can build a deviceless primary refresh token, which due to the documentation doesn't fully exist.
No, I was about to say that the PRT is like, wait, that breaks.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be device bound, right?
It's device bound,
Yeah.
but turns out you can also have it deviceless. And with that, you can register a device and actually make a device.
And I would think maybe that device doesn't appear anywhere. How do you unenroll? Because I think one of the authentication things with PRT is it's valid for 90 days, it's bound to the device. And in order to devalidate that, you would have to unenroll the device or unregister the device. So how do you do that if there's no device attached to the PRT?
You don't.
You don't?
So that's harder. It's harder to mitigate, but it also is less useful. In more mature environments, because they generally have some conditional access policies to do certain things. So it has to be a Windows device, complete claim, and that kind of stuff. So then you just register a new device, and you get a full PRT with the device claim in it. So that's the flow we can talk about, and that's what we'll also demo. I think Dirk can now even make it from fish to like full PRT.
Of course he will. I think
which
you guys
is
are
it's super nice.
Solid combo for that. You being like a Mac, heavy Mac user and a heavy with the Mac experience, and he brings in a lot of the super tech savvy Entra ID portion of it, right?
Yeah. Also, and then we also found another flow for where they used Secure Enclave on Mac. That's the most recent one that I think they made it public like 2 months ago or something, and that's closer to the Windows version. But again, very different. So they use like elliptic curve to get like the key from the Mac TPM-like thing, and then actually negotiate. So there's not even a session key anymore. So it's very different. But you can use it in the same way. So it's not better. It's just different. But
I mean, it sounds like if anybody in chat is going to Troopers, you should definitely catch this talk. Do you got the time frame for that in your head when you're talking?
I think on Thursday afternoon
Okay.
after lunch.
Sorry to put you on the spot like that, but so Thursday
No, yeah,
probably
it's
on
close
Thursday.
enough. Yeah.
Check out their accounts and Olaf's talk. But that's not why I managed to get Olaf on stream today. So we're going to talk about FalconHound, which is a tool you guys released. I want to say half a year ago now, 3 months ago, something like that, ish. Time goes by
I think
fast.
I released it October last year even.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Let's go fast
But
then.
yeah, time flies. But I haven't been very vocal around it, so that's maybe the reason. I wrote a blog back then, and I think in March, somewhere in March, I spoke about it at the SpectreOps conference.
Right.
And then it got a little bit more traction. It's also a little bit more mature now than when I released it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So do you want to bring up your VM and maybe go through the GitHub repository, explain the project, and show
Yeah.
us?
Let's go.
Let's see if this works. This is I think this is the third
Yeah,
time or
this is
second
the
time we have a guest.
pivotal
on stream.
moment.
Yeah, this is like, will it display, will it show? And then you guys in chat, be sure to let us know if you can't see the text or not. I have another view where this screen we're in is a bit bigger, but I want to keep chat here. So, can anybody see the text? Is it full screen your view? Can you see the text? Maybe this isn't as pivotal live in the GitHub, but once we get to the terminal stuff later, let us know if you can't see the text, and I'll try to switch it so it looks better. So yeah, I mean, talk us through what is this, and obviously I think I know the answer to why this might not be directly useful for me, but what's the target audience with this, and what is it?
Well, the target audience is evidently blue, right? It's basically the tool that I was lacking when I was talking to other blue teams. So BloodHound, of course, has been built and used by red teamers for years. SpectreOps now also has the BloodHound Enterprise, which is very tailored towards blue teams. But still they, at least most of our clients, struggle to actually do something with BloodHound. So they usually, after they had like a red team, they'll run it once, try to do some queries that they get from either Git, somewhere where somebody shared it, or where the red team shared some things like, hey, you actually need to fix this ADCS stuff or whatever. So they'll run it once, they'll play a little bit with it, and then get stuck. And that's a shame, because it's one of my favorite tools, and it's partially because I'm very visually oriented, so I kind of like looking at a problem instead of trying to dissect it, but also it shows you stuff that you otherwise wouldn't see. On AD definitely, but even more so on the cloud, where if you go to the Azure portal, try to find out who has ownership permissions over something is pretty unachievable as far as I know. So if you know the resource, then you can pivot it back a lot. So, but it's kind of terrible. So that was one of the reasons why I figured, like, hey, there must be a better way of enabling blue teams to actually start using this. And one of the first things that I ran into when I started embedding it at some clients, where we just so like, okay, let us take care of your scanning and your ingest for all the information. And then we ran into it at one client already, where they had to like flag a couple of weeks in advance to get a ticket so that they can actually have the permission to scan, because otherwise it would be detected, SOC would be mad, and that kind of stuff. And then the next phase was where they had all these, so they actually did microsegmentation, as every company should, but still most don't. So a lot of firewall rules had to be added to actually allow the session scanning to go along, right? Because you need to get like SMB access, which they weren't very eager on doing for all the right reasons. So all these kind of things made me think like, hey, but I have this information in the logs, right? So why would I scan for that in the first place? We can just get that. So that started the whole project, where I worked together with JD, who's now at SpectreOps, and he built a first version in PowerShell to actually query the logs in this case in Sentinel, and basically look for all the logon events and sync that to Neo4j.
Interesting. So you're basically trying to correlate data sources into the
Yes.
same magical view that is BloodHound, but then since this is data we already have, what's the point of trying to scan it in this very offensive red team way?
Yeah, and the problem with scanning as well is it's in a big environment, it's freaking slow.
Yes.
That's one of the things, and it's always a moment in time thing, right? So I scan
100%.
now, you log in now, and I my scan didn't see you because you did it after the scan and it's already old. So and you're not going to scan every 20 minutes because that's a lot of work. So that's where the logs are amazing, because you can just schedule something that to constantly sync this. So that's where it started, and now it grew out of control a little bit, where I also start looking at all the things that are changing in your environment. So not only group additions or log-on events or local users being created, but also alerts that are generated on a machine, because if a machine has certain alerts on it, I consider it as owned in the red team sphere. And if that happens on a machine that is quite pivotal in a path to a sensitive resource, then I want to know about it. So now I can. And so the same with, go.
Yeah, so sort of proactively uncovering attack paths as they are made available, either by a current attacker or during a pen test or by misconfiguration. That could happen, where... But that's really interesting, because I thought about this multiple times when doing, the initial SharpHound and collecting the data. One thing is obviously a point in time, but also, freaking point of day. If you do this 8 p.m. In the evening, you're going to get different results in terms of sessions being active and users having access to different data and whatnot in terms of instead of doing it maybe like 2 p.m. or lunchtime, whatever, right? So that's really interesting. I would like to know how many in chat, if Pentesters has ever used the feature in SharpHound where it runs concurrent scans. I can't recall what the exact tag is, but there's like a run continuously or whatever. I would say I think I've never used that. That would probably be something that I now would think of as best practice. Run that continuously through a day and then look at the data.
You're gonna stand out as well, right? So that's probably the most likely to get detected 100%. From a red team perspective. And in a blue team, that's fine because you know about it.
Yeah, from a red team perspective, it wouldn't be doable. No, for sure not. No.
At some point for the red side, we even thought about making something like this to run. If you already own the domain, for instance, just run something on a DC and get the logs and do the same, right? Sure. It would be possible, because sometimes you get DA and you don't need DA as a target, but you need to get into a certain system so you can actually watch the systems to see where that user that you're waiting for is actually logging in.
I don't know how many times I've wrote like custom event log parsers in order to identify where the last user I'm looking for logged on from, in order to find the computer I need to laterally move onto in order to get access to. That's a real scenario right there. I think that's also...
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to skip ahead here, but I think that's also a lot that correlated into Spectre making Nemesis, and we starting to look at data gathering and data, what's it called, like... Parsing and populating it, like enrichment, data enrichment, I think is the word for it, right? Sorry, go ahead, continue on the
no, yeah, but that's the whole thing, right? So, and with more and more tools being accessible from a blue team perspective, I also know vulnerabilities, because I can like Defender for Endpoint scans for it, but you can also connect it to another platform. And the same with publicly accessible machines. That's also something that I can get from Defender for Endpoint, for instance, sync that. So I can also see like, hey, which machines are publicly exposed and have a path to a sensitive resource, or machines that have vulnerabilities on it, where we now have one client that already uses it a little bit in their patch managed prioritization flow, which is awful sentence to say, but it's basically I use it to see, it's like, hey, which machines do we actually need to patch because they are a liability, because at some point they had a SCCM server that had like a remote code execution vulnerability on it. And SCCM is kind of interesting already, yes. And it has a path to domain admin basically quite rapidly. So that helped them a little bit into if you have thousands of machines. And that's also where you, with scanning earlier mentioned, is like at 8 o'clock at night, the view is different. And then if you have an environment that is like globally spanned, it's like constantly going on, right? So if you always scan in Europe during the weekdays, then you would never see what is happening in Asia because they're already home. So you're missing out on a lot of information. So that's why I started building this to actually keep this running concurrently. So ideally, you would run this every 15 minutes if your volume can take it and your machine that you run it on. That's probably the biggest bottleneck. But I've ran this at environments where they had like 200,000 endpoints, and it still works.
Yeah, then it's probably
Just
possible.
you need a beefier BloodHound machine, but it definitely it definitely works.
And I think with the latest improvements they made to the BloodHound, the CE version, that also improved a lot of the how big data can get, right? The speed of it.
Yeah, and they worked on the one of the last versions. They also actually worked on the ingest, where it was quite painful to get a large data set in there. So we have one client where we are scanning, with Azure Hound, we're scanning about 60 plus gigs of JSON, and trying to shoehorn that into the BloodHound interface was horrible, because you basically had to do it over the API because the UI doesn't take it. And then in previous versions, it would first load it into memory, then actually starts ingesting and processing it. And they changed that, which is kind of nice. So you don't need 128 gigs of RAM anymore. So it's huge now. It's super nice. It just streams it in. So instead of 6 hours ingest, it now is 1 hour. So that's kind of nice.
And even though if I'm trying to think of like from a blue timber, yes, I would want to run plain old SharpHound continuously every day, all day. But you can't really do that because the amount of noise that makes. You know, how would you the time and effort put into like fine tuning your detections to make sure that machine running SharpHound, and then you have like an attacker and noise blends together, and I mean that's interesting. So dope, cool. So how, from like a techniverse perspective, what is FalconHound made of? Like I see Go here, so I'm guessing Go.
Yeah. It is definitely Go. So we started in PowerShell. That's fully written by JD, and PowerShell is super nice if you want to do quick things or things that don't require a huge data volume. That's what I learned from it, at least. I'm not a huge PowerShell guru. I kind of suck at it. And I am not a programmer in the first place. But I was talking to the BloodHound team a lot, and they were like, yeah, we do everything Go, way more performant, super nice, multi-platform, that kind of thing. So I figured, okay, let's give it a go. Pun not intended. Wow. But I heard it when I was saying, I was like, nah. But it turned out that I actually understand how Go mostly works in at least the simple version. And I kind of liked the structure of it. The thing that always put me off PowerShell and Python is that it's untyped, and it sometimes tries to be helpful in making an array, a list, or a string, where I want it to be something else. So that always I had weird crashes, and I never understood why. And in Go, you have to basically, ideally, at least type everything. So that made it very easy for me. So I started writing a lot of it in modules, and then one of my colleagues, Gijs, was actually nice enough to write it into classes. So now it's very modular. So it's actually very simple to add an input or an output processor, which are basically the functions. I can also add them, so where we can build compatibility, right? So I can just build an Elastic input processor, which is basically just a handler for the queries to the Elastic API.
It's like a data collector, essentially, right?
Yes, yeah. So in like the most simple terms, FalconHound is just a data transformation tool. So I query something, I do something with it, and I write it somewhere else. And so you can make it as versatile as you want, but within like 130 lines of code, you can do all the stuff on Elastic at least. So it's intentionally simple. So there's probably some shortcuts, and people that actually are very good programmers that would laugh at this, because I'm definitely not. But it works, and it's quite performant. So I'm quite pleased with it. So I started at first with only Sentinel and Defender for Endpoint, because that's the tools where we work most with. But yeah, I soon learned that there's also people that like Splunk or Elastic and these kinds of things. So I also added that compatibility to it, and even some other stuff. So the most recent one is probably the BloodHound one, where the BloodHound CE API now is allowing more Cypher, because they transform all of their queries for, well, partially protection of the backend, but also because they at some point want to go away from Neo4j and go to Postgres, and they keep it as a translation layer in between. So you weren't able to do, for instance, a merge or a set or delete over the API, because it would just filter it out. So now they have that, so you can actually do way more with it.
Oh, interesting.
And how the tool works is, of course, you need to compile it first. And then if you download the pre-compiled versions I post every time, you only see like the actions layer. And of course your config file, which I can probably show in a sec as well. And then the actions are basically like the tasks that it would do. And they're deliberately in order, particularly because I first want to get data, I want to update my database as best as I can, right? Get all the newest information into the BloodHound database or Neo4j database, and then actually start querying it for, hey, do I have a path to this, or do I see other stuff?
Okay.
So, for instance, on the Sentinel side, I can look at log-off events, I can look at new device registrations, I can look at people added to a group or removed from a group, because that impacts like paths and access to resources, and way more, right? Of course, this is just a small set. There's way more options, but I didn't have time to build those yet. So you can think of probably 100 other things that might be interesting to look at.
So just to clarify then, are these queries that you run against BloodHound database after you imported the Sentinel data that are Sentinel specific? Or
no, so this is basically where you ask Sentinel something.
Okay,
so in this case,
the query for Sentinel. Gotcha.
Yeah, so each action has a source bit and a target bit. So the source is basically where you tell it, so hey, I want to run this against Sentinel, so it knows which input selector it needs to do. And then you just write natively the query language of that platform that you are trying to query. So in the Splunk case, you would write Splunk query here, or whichever you like. So here, in this case, I just look for users added to a group, right? So this is the object ID that I get out, the username, who did it, and what's the user principal name of that person that added somebody to a group. And then on the target side, you can have, like in this case, there's only one. So you can also do multiple targets, where you can say, hey, I want it to Neo4j. And then you do cipher. So basically in cipher, I tell it like what it should do.
And this,
so in this case, it would.
This structure, this data structure that you insert into Neo4j, that is the default BloodHound structure of BloodHound objects, or is that a custom object? Okay.
Well, in this case, yeah, good question. So in this case, it is. This is just native, how it is designed by the SpectreOps team. Of course, I made some alterations to it because, for instance, MFA settings are not there yet. So I do it on multiple levels. So I get the changes to the MFA from the logs, but I also get it from the Graph API. So there's a graph function as well where I get MFA settings. So in this case, it's not a query because I had to build a special Graph API function for it. Yeah. That will get all of the MFA settings for all users. And then we'll update the database with it. So that's generally something you do once, right? So I get it now complete, and then I update it with the logs. And this is pretty cool because now you can also see who's sharing phone numbers or who's sharing email addresses, accounts, or so basically who has access to multiple accounts. And that's something that has helped a couple of times already at certain clients where they even had a fraud case where one of their finance executives, his account had like proper MFA, but like the Microsoft Authenticator on it. But it turned out he also had a phone number on it that 5 other accounts also had, which wasn't his phone number. So these kinds of things are very cool to hunt for. So that kind of useful, but it could also be interesting the other way around, right? If you pop one user as a red teamer, like who else do I have access to? So in this case, you kind of need a relatively high permissions to get this. I think you need like directory read all or something like it. So it's more than you would generally have on a generic account that you pop. But I mean, technically you could still run this if you have the right access, right? So it's that's kind of interesting. So I do everything with app registrations, but technically I'm just using the SDK. So you can also give it an access token if you would have that. I just didn't add that functionality.
Yeah.
because it's
I
primarily
guess
added
it's better
for Blue.
practice to have an app registration than to have.
Well, it's
like
way
a-
better. It's
yeah,
way
yeah.
better. Or even better would be a managed identity. But that will also require you to run this in the cloud. So that's something not everybody wants, especially not with all their BloodHound information for all the right reasons.
That makes sense.
So that's one of the modifications I made to the BloodHound database. I do have the same with like OAuth consent. That's also probably something very interesting for red, but equally for blue for that matter, right? So that you can see which app has, I don't know, read write all on something that you don't want it to have and who has access to that. And the same goes for probably the most interesting edge I introduced is it's nice to see who's logged on somewhere, but at some point they also log off. And
Right.
what do you do then? So the thing I did there is, oh, not this one, there. So here, this is basically where I do all my Neo4j stuff. So one of the things is I do some cleanup actions, and I also do some new calculations. For instance, on that MFA stuff, I want to create an edge when something is shared. And you can only do that after you did the log collection, right? So that's why it's on number 10. So one of the things I also remove vulnerable tags from a host if I know after a certain time I didn't see an update, so it's gone. But the other one is also I remove older sessions. So at some point I decided 3 days, then I time out the session. So I remove the has session edge, but I introduce a had session edge.
Oh, interesting.
So I write at that moment, so like this user was here. And that's useful for like 2 reasons. So one is that user might be back. So the path is still potentially there. And the other one is that if I flag an alert like now and tomorrow my analyst looks at it, then it might be removed already. And then it looks at the graph and it's like, yeah, I don't see this path. So
Yeah, this path doesn't
bullshit.
exist. Yeah.
So it's also useful for forensics and these kinds of things. So that's primarily there. But I think the primary reason is, I mean, if that user was there 3 days ago, he might be back tomorrow or next month. But that might be enough time for an attacker to wait and just get the credentials out of memory or whatever. So that's one of the things that I also do with it. And then afterwards, once my database is in a like up-to-date state, I start querying for all these kinds of things where I can look for, I don't know, an AD user that can actually access a managed identity or these kinds of things. And here you also see that I have multiple outputs, right? So I can write it to a CSV file, which is on localhost. I can also send that as a watch list to Sentinel, so I can use that in all my detections. And I can also write to Sentinel. So there it will output the paths that I find, but then in a list, because Sentinel can't deal with graphs. So I can show you that in a second. And one of the things I do there is this ph query bit is basically just a field that I populate with this query. So if I would generate a path and therefore a log entry, I also get the cipher query that an analyst can copy paste and put into their BloodHound interface to actually see why I flagged this. So that's just a helpful little trick to give them a shortcut. They don't need to learn cipher if they're not very comfortable with that. Which you can understand. It's not the most accessible query.
To be honest, it's one of those things that I have to almost relearn or reintroduce every time I need to modify one to find one. You have your cheat sheet of ciphers, and then, I need to identify this. Now, how does this work again? But it seems like you've become quite proficient in ciphers at this point, Olaf. So maybe I should start bothering you with it.
Yeah, but that's also for me. If I don't use it like on a regular basis, I also forget some of the tricks that you can do with it. Turns out that ChatGPT actually, or GitHub Copilot knows it pretty darn well.
Nice.
So you can definitely use that as a helpful aid. You can't ask it like, give me a full query always.
Inbound,
but even it's even aware of BloodHound, so you can ask it certain things. Sometimes it just starts hallucinating though.
That would be a dope introduction to BloodHound CE, to like be able to type out what you want to find and then have like a direct translation to it. Please do that.
Yeah,
somebody.
It's possible. I know it actually. So there was a team from Dreadnought. They are a company that hacks AIs and does all kinds of really, really cool stuff with AI. they built a simple LangChain like version of this, so only for one use case. But yeah, if you spend a little bit more time on it, it's actually really good because it can even evaluate outputs and then based on that do a follow-up query in these cases. There is a rough version of it that exists. I don't think they open sourced it.
Is Dreadnought that startup AI company that
Yes.
I heard about like a half a year ago or something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think they had a couple of big people or big names in it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one of the guys, I forgot his name, but he's crazy smart, and they built all kinds of. They do red teaming against models, and they also are working on a tool that can be used within a red team, but then AI focus, which is scary, I guess. But
Sick.
yeah, they do quite some cool stuff with it.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So I think we got a pretty good grasp of how this all aligns together. Again, in the short term, it's just about getting access to data, transforming that into something meaningful, and inserting that into whatever your major platform of choice is. And then you also have these tidbits added, so people investigating potential breaches or whatnot can get access and identify what's going on. And it seems like, there is definitely, seems like BloodHound definitely still has a way to go in adding custom fields. And it's really nice that, as you said, you had session makes a lot of sense to add. Same with MFA. I don't think it has an MFA
Nope.
properly by default as well. So that makes sense to add. Cool, interesting.
Yeah, and that's we had a very conversation. That's kind of nice. The team is extremely eager for feedback. So they built the thing they have now is super stable, but that's also because their schema is hard coded into the backend. So it doesn't make it as flexible as it would be for somebody like me that just wants to do weird shit with it. And they are now working on a model where you can extend the schema. That's probably going to take about a bit of time because they want to do it really well. So at some point there will be a way where you can just say, hey, I want to graph whatever I like, and I want to use BloodHound as my visual representation of it, and that will be possible then. Sick. But for now, the way they have it now is that they still work with my data. I can't just use the full API capabilities that they have. So now I sometimes need to do shortcuts either through Cypher or I completely bypass their API and work with the Neo4j API. So there's definitely a way, and it doesn't make a huge difference from the people using it, because basically what you do is you need to configure stuff. So this is basically where you put all your creds. Of course, these are not my creds, and that's for each platform. You do the same thing, and the same goes for like Neo4j and BloodHound. So they have different ways of authenticating. Yeah. Technically, you could do both. For now, probably easier to only do Neo4j because it does everything you need. And then once like full query compatibility is there within the CE interface, I'll probably drop Neo4j compatibility and use their API because it's kind of nice to
and
have
then when BloodHound moves
options
to Postgres, then you won't really need to think about it either. So.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And you can still do Cypher. So that's their whole thing. So they kind of like how Cypher works. So they'll still support Cypher if they have Postgres, and then you don't need to work with the Neo4j backend anymore, which is going to be super nice. Because the biggest downside of Neo4j is that it's single-threaded for the community edition. So if you have a big query and you want to do something else, it's queued, so you have to wait. So that's so you can't do parallelization or anything funky, cool stuff. Yeah. Well, usually you don't run into it as a red teamer because you run it in your database and you work with it by yourself. With CE, you have the option to add multiple user accounts and actually share that information, which is actually very useful in some red teams, because then you can just show like, hey, I found this, and you don't need to screen share. Somebody else can like run with your query and move along with it. So that's kind of neat. Yeah. Yeah, and so FalconHound itself is a CLI tool. So it's the cool fit about Go is that you can compile it for each OS, right? So you can just run it on Windows. I did this for you because I never do this. I run it on my Mac or on a Linux box, but this was easier to screen share. Yeah, it just works, which is kind of nice. So this is the ARM Windows. So I also have an ARM build,
Nice.
but it also works fine. So generally, what I would recommend if you want to actually start using it in your environment, I'll probably get a Linux VM, put BloodHound CE on it, because it has to be Dockerized. You don't want to Dockerize on Windows. And just run this next to it with a cron job, because that will be the most performant. Otherwise, you have to run it on a different machine and then transfer everything over your LAN or your WAN or Wi-Fi, whatever. So it's going to be less quick. And you can just build a cron job. So one of the things that you can do is just, I showed you the action lists, and I can't type and speak at the same time. So that's why it's slow. So, but this is the same overview as I had before, right? So you can just get a list of everything that it can do currently, which is enabled. So you can have it just run. So if you would just say go, then it will start doing all 70 queries. In this case, it's not going to be very exciting because this is my lab environment that's querying. So there's hardly any results, right? Because I haven't done anything. So this is, it's a bit boring, so I'll skip along. But one of the things that might be interesting to query is, let's see, new sessions, because I at least logged on a couple of times. So I did, and now it's actually already querying Neo4j, right? So now it starts finding all kinds of stuff. So it found, for instance, 58 paths from an exposed device to high-value nodes. It found 2 external users with high privileges, all kinds of things that you, and this is the bit where a red teamer could do the same, right? So you can just run these queries as well. If you connect your BloodHound to your Cobalt Strike or your Mythic or whatever you're using, you could keep it up to date with all the stuff you're pwning at least, so you can see, hey, did I get a new path or anything like that? So you could still get some benefits out of it. And then, you can also write to Markdown, for instance. So you get simple Markdown reports. You can get JSON. You can get all the kind of stuff you want. But if you're only interested in one thing, for instance, you can also just run this single query. So you give it the ID of the query, and now it gets 2 results. But if you haven't run this in a while, you can also say, I want to, I don't know, I want to see it for the last 7 days or something. Oh, typing is hard. So now it will modify the query and look for 7 days.
Interesting. So you can also do that where you go way back, and then you will probably have new sessions and end sessions at this node then now, right? Or
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then now it would also get things from 5 days ago, indeed, which in the next run of the Neo4j query, it will already time those out, put them as a head session. So you know that the user is currently not there anymore, but at least you can see that he has been, and that's maybe also a little bit interesting to show what that looks like, right? Because now we are only talking on the CLI, but this is basically what most people would see. So this is just a stock BloodHound Community Edition. The only thing is that I added dark mode with the browser extension because my eyes hurt otherwise. And this is just one of the queries that you could run, right? So I'm only looking for paths from a computer that is exposed. So exposed is for me that it's publicly accessible for the internet. Okay. That's one of the attributes I get from Defender for Endpoint. That has or had a session where a user has or had a session, and it is not a computer account. That's what the query does, and it gives me 2 machines with multiple users on it. And then if we zoom in a little bit, we can see that this user is there and has been there. And if we click on that, we can also see when that user was there previous time. And this was earlier today, I think. Yeah, this was this afternoon when I logged in, at least to have some demo stuff. And it's the same for this user, right? So he had a session and he has a session, and this user was there like a couple of days ago, but hasn't been there since. So that's sort of the other thing. And that exposed flag is connected to this computer, right? So on this computer, we have a lot of alerts. So that's one of the things I share. So if Defender for Endpoint or Sentinel has an alert, I will sync that to this host as well, because that gives me a flag that it might be potentially compromised.
And then you can
So that's something I want to be aware of.
If you want more information about what's going on.
Yeah, that can help me prioritize certain alerts over others. So if I know this host also has a path to domain admin or whichever resource I care about, I know that this is a higher priority alert than some other hosts where just the secretary is on and she doesn't have any access, right? So that's a prioritization factor for a blue team primarily.
This must be absolute goal. I mean, obviously, one of the first things incident response asks for is, do you have any logs, you know? And imagine doing incident response and you come to this and you essentially have everything.
They'll have
obviously,
the best
this
day
is
of their life. Usually there's no logs.
Right? You would probably not need incident response if you have this kind of insight into your network anyway, but still, that's that actual goal, being able to... So many value propositions that roll for... I mean, all colors, red, blue, and purple, just being able to... As a red teamer, it would be useful for me to know, like, okay, this user regularly logs onto this machine, so it might make sense for me to plant a backdoor or watering hole attack or whatever to get those credentials, or to try to maybe enable cache credentials. Next time the user logs on, I can get that cache. And then for blue teams, responding to, okay, this is word activity or whatever, and then being able to correlate that with possible alerts and everything. This is really nice. And as you said, this is essentially data ingestion and enrichment into one single unity. And I think it makes sense because a lot of companies now, they have so many different technological stacks inside.
Yeah, but they never bring them together, right?
No,
so
right.
it's the visibility of it is kind of sad, or at least you lose the benefit of it. So I also get whether it's publicly exposed. This is also something I add, and since when, and then also on which port. So this machine has basically RDP open to the internet,
nice.
so that's always a great idea. And then, the rest is more what's commonly there. So this is nothing that I do to it. So in this case, I sync alert. So if I close an alert in my EDR, it will also be removed here, right? So at some point, it's not owned anymore. So it also says the owned flag, I think.
Last week, I made a video about recall, and even though recall in itself might be dumb, this would be fucking goldmine for you. If you would ingest recall data from all your machines and then put it into this, you could literally search for like users having keywords, password, users having touched passports in the last hour. Could be a lot of interesting stuff.
Recall is a goldmine for everybody that's not the primary intended user, right?
Yes,
it's the same for a red teamer. It's like it is just I don't need to do anything anymore.
No.
It's just got a rootkit on my box.
Yeah, essentially.
So,
I think I phrased it as, after I compromise the machine, there's already a plugin I can connect to that shows me, like, it's file history on drugs. Like, show me everything. It's so wow.
Yeah.
But okay, that's
sick.
interesting as well.
Yeah. So and then from there you can go bonkers, right? You can do shortest path queries from these kinds of hosts. There's a bit of error here. And then you can also see like what would the impact be of this host being compromised,
cool.
and this is probably big. But and in this case, it spirals out two ways. So I think where's our host? So here it is. So and this is more common BloodHound use, but now I can see that this user that was logged on there is also like he's basically domain admin already, so that was easy. But then from there we can also pivot to a completely different domain. Where another user has access that also has a session on that other workstation that we saw. So basically this brings the two together, which is lucky if you're a red teamer, but in most cases it will be a little bit harder.
And with this, you could potentially simulate like what the user getting compromised would lead to the quickest way.
Yeah.
So like, you know what I mean? You could
for sure. You could inject
every
that
user, and then you can get like a count for how many nodes to DA, and then you can be like, this user is technically very low privilege, but it seems like there's only 2 nodes to DA. Why? And then you can look at it. That's really cool. That's really
well, and it's actually funny that you mentioned that, because that's one of the things that I also write, right? So on the Sentinel side, and this is a bit harder to show because the resolution is a bit meh, but bear with me. So it will also count like the nested and the direct paths that somebody has. So for each user, we'll count the path, and then basically we'll get all the steps that user has to take, right? So the Snowman user is basically so many steps away from the backup operator's one. So in this case, it's very short, but there's probably some other path in there. Of course, this is a lab, and it's based on the GoAd thing from the Orange Cyber guys, which is vulnerable as hell. So there's a lot of paths, right? So in this case, you can also hop in like 7 paths to schema admin and these kinds of things.
Wow.
And the cool bit, at least about Sentinel, that I know, or Custo in the first place, the query language, is that you can also do diffs. So I can do time-based diffs. So I run a query every 15 minutes on the BloodHound side, write that to my Sentinel log store, and I can look between the last and the current one if there's a change. If there's a new path, I only want to see that. I don't care about this because I know about this already, and hopefully some are patched and some you can't because it's just how it is. So if there's new ones introduced, I get an alert out of it. So that's sort of the biggest use case for it. And that's the same with all these other stuff, right? So if I get new users that are sharing their phone number, I kind of want to know about it. And I even show you like the phone number that is used. So don't call that because it's fake. Well, it's actually not fake. I stole it from Better Call Saul. So you get the Better Call Saul hotline if you call it if you want.
Okay, this is really great. I think I've definitely seen the value proposition in this, especially if you have multiple platforms. And I think a lot of companies go that route because they might buy something from Microsoft and they get access to some data, but maybe they aren't really happy with Sentinel and they want to use everything else. Maybe they want to use the data from Microsoft in terms of their Enter ID logs, but they want to use some other EDR solution, so they can't use MD, so they want to use Elastic, so they use the Elastic query, and then it all just mismatches together, and then you need some way to proactively cover and hunt within your company.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that makes so much sense. So this is one of the other things I write as a target. You can also write to a watch list, which is basically the lookup list is Splunk language. It's a CSV file where you can populate it with certain data. So in this case, I use exposed machines, but I also do it for curl users or domain admins and these kinds of things. So that you can use it within your detections to always have an up-to-date version of whatever you care about. So if you want to see curl users and you have a query that looks for new logon events, which shouldn't happen in the first place, right? So if you see an interactive logon from a user with an SPN, that shouldn't happen, so I want to have an alert. But you never know if you don't have like a data set like this, which users actually do have an SPN, or you have to build all kinds of weird PowerShell scripts to upload that. So that's another use case that I added. What else is cool? I think this is also fun where you can see, so this is basically that MFA sharing bit where you can actually see the impact of like certain sharing accounts. So here you have a user that has a certain phone number, but this user has that same phone number on it. So if you would click on it, you can actually see it, right? So this is the phone number, the sign-in preference is SMS, which is not the best idea to do. And you could do the same where you can also see like who's sharing with who, right? So you can see on the edge, that kind of stuff.
Obviously,
so that's another case of it.
I think one of the things I found a lot of when I did pen testing was a shared user accounts between like privileged and non-privileged. And then obviously we would look for if they use the same password, because then you have a broken privilege separation, right? Because they're supposed to be 2 different accounts, but the user has the same password, so there's no separation, might as well just be one. And you could look for something similar here where a user has the same MFA device or the same MFA method enrolled to 2 different privileged accounts, because then you could...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's where it gets really scary, because there's always all kinds of intricate like things that you don't always see. That was also the case with the Midnight Blizzard one, right? That's sort of based on the blog that Andy Robbins from Spectrops wrote. I kind of recreated it, which was kind of a pain, because basically what it is that like this application can run as this application, but this application is actually in a different tenant. So this application has run as properties over an application that is in a different tenant, and that app actually has like the privileged role administrator, so you can basically assign yourself anything, and that's sort of how at least allegedly the Russian crew basically built a user in this tenant and gave themselves the email read all permission and started reading everybody's emails and made a mess of it. So that was, it's kind of interesting to actually visualize that within
That
a
must
tool
have been
like
a
this.
pain to set up.
It was because there's no official documentation on how you can actually do this. So and there's no UI option in the portal on the Azure side either. So you have to do this via the Graph API with all kinds of weird commands. It took me probably a day to recreate, but I'm also not a very big Azure admin. I use it. So there's maybe an easier way.
I think the documentation varies greatly when it comes to what Microsoft wants us to
Yeah,
use.
yeah. Some of it is really good, and some of it is pretty dismal. Right? We were talking about the PRTs earlier. There's no documentation on the implementation on other platforms than Windows, and well, based on the research that Dirk-Jan and I did, there's a lot of differences in the implementation of it. So
why would you do research? It's safe, Olaf. Why would you need to?
Trust me, it's fine. Exactly.
Yeah, literally, trust me, it's fine. Trust me, bro.
But still, I also want to know how it works.
No,
right? It's the same with the EDRs. I want to take them apart to understand where I can trust it and where I can't. But that makes it fun. Sometimes you find something that people don't want you to find, I guess. This is one of the other ones that I added, and at some point it starts to become a list of all the features. But it's so you can also see like what kind of consented things a certain app has over another. So sometimes you can do consent phishing. That's harder to do now, fortunately. But still, you can use it as a backdoor where you can create an app consented to certain things. So in this case, this app has like I'm only looking for read-write consents because those are the most useful. You can also do user impersonation or some other ones, and you can basically see what kind of consented permissions this has, right? So in this case, also this totally fine app has mail read all, mailbox settings read write on the whole Office app. So you can go to town with this if you would have the creds for that. Can read everybody's emails and also impersonate users. So you can also probably send as.
It would be really cool. You know what would be cool to add here would be to add Teams chats or groups that people are added to. Yeah. Because that just seems to be like an actual group that you can identify and add yourself to. I think I've used this a couple of times with the Graph Runner toolkit. It'd be interesting to see like groups of people in chats. And then you could probably correlate like, okay, this users, why are, I don't know what benefit it would give, I guess, but it would still, might be cool to have like.
Well, it could be useful, right, for phishing and that kind of stuff. But there's also, on Azure, you have also the dynamic groups, which are super interesting, which is not covered by default. But that's also something I added recently, where you can at least also see the rule set that is tied to that dynamic group, so that you can see, can I get myself in there? And the same with eligible groups and roles. So that's more with the Entra privileged access management feature, which most companies are switching towards, where you get a certain role assigned, but it's not applied right now, right? So you're eligible to get it, but if you're not currently assigned it, then the Azure Hound won't show it. That's another flag I added where you can at least see that's an eligibility that you have. So if you own that user, you know that you can promote yourself to a certain role and actually do other stuff.
That would probably unlock a lot of black paths if you could see that.
Yeah, it's very useful. It's very useful, and it's Azure Hound I think collects it but not uses it yet. So that's just a simple thing that they could add to the processing, which is most likely on the backlog already.
Let's see. Guys in chat, if you have any questions or wanting to do demos, please feel free to ask. If not, I think we're heading towards demo wrap down. So any questions or anything like that, hit us up in chat. I think this is pretty great, and I think, you know, for the companies that are mature enough to look at implementing something like this, it's probably going to bring great value, especially considering that it's open source. And it's, you know, I think most of other solutions trying to do this is essentially an AI dashboard that you have to pay thousands of dollars for a month, slapped on top of a couple of data connectors.
New business idea, yeah.
Right, and that's what it is, right? It's just dashboards. That's what people are selling these days. AI dashboards that will magically solve all your problems. Which is obviously not the case. You actually need to understand your problem properly before you can solve it, not just buy random ass AI dashboards. which people are
No,
great
and
at
you can still put this in a dashboard. That's also what we did. So one of the things that we're building to really sell is where this is only a plugin for where we are enriching all kinds of information. So in this case, I'm only enriching the graph, but we can also enrich all these entities that are within the graph and to get way more information out of that. So we built a product around that where this already ties in as well. So we have a dashboard where you can even get like a live BloodHound query as an analyst. So you get an alert with a lot of context around it, which you wouldn't get by design. And then we add even the BloodHound information so that you can also see the potential impact of this user being compromised. And one of the things that I'm hoping CE will add soon again is that owned diamond thingy, or the skull that you had in Legacy BloodHound, where you would see owned resources. Because then you can also see along a graph, you can see like if there are multiple alerts along a path, that might actually be very interesting. And you could even start predicting lateral movement, because you can sort of assume that the attacker is looking at a similar path, even though it's less enriched than we have it. So we see more. But you can also predict then, it's like, hey, if you compromise this user and that host, it's quite likely that they go to, I don't know, the next one in line, or maybe they're there already. So you can start investigating that host, or you isolate it and cut off their path, and they have to figure out another way. So that's pretty cool. But that's next level, right? Because that's pretty difficult for teams to do, and they don't always have the same operating speed as a red team might have. But at least it gives you the possibility to do something like it. And you can automate that as well, right?
A lot of these issues just comes down to having the insight, which is what we're aiming to solve with this, right? If you have the data and insight, it's easy to start looking at predictions, as you say, and then you smack AI on top of it, and then, as you say, it might be next level, might be able to know what an attacker is looking to do next based on what's possible, and like, okay, if he moves to this server, then he probably thought that was a path, but maybe that wasn't the path, and then you can lock that down preactively or whatever. That's pretty dope. And assuming you have the insight, again, the telemetry is the key to follow that chain, because then it becomes it can bite you in the ass if you think you have the insight and you think you can predict something and you're overly confident in how the attacker might approach, and then suddenly it just goes into something where you don't have an insight, right? Then it becomes scary. So then you need to predict that as well, or we need to have some sort of assurance that you have the insight that you're looking at and that the data is correct and whatnot. And I know...
there are interesting fields where you can even go into deception, right? So now we see all these graphs, we can introduce some additional paths that look easier for an attacker to take. Right. So we introduce some honey traps there, or these kinds of things. That's something I definitely want to experiment with more. And this is where maybe some, not AI, but at least some automated feature would be able to inject that a little bit more real time. Where you can actually fool an attacker into a certain direction and contain them there and see what they're doing or something.
I thought it was. I think I saw a project way back where defenders would do man in the middle RDP against an attacker, and then capture the RDP session.
Yeah, that was at DEF CON last year, I think.
Right. That would be super dope. Like proactively introduce
Canadian team
RDP honey traps and like capture what the attacker is doing, and obviously that's like next level. Like you're beyond detecting and defending. You're like into trolling and like essentially learning about how the attacker works, which is really very few companies in the world would want to go there. Most would be happy just spending their money keeping the attackers outside, but that's pretty cool as well.
True.
I think this is really dope, and it has its. I sadly probably won't be in the target group to sit down and use this unless it becomes like a big thing with Nemesis and Cobalt Strike or other C2 frameworks and whatnot.
Yeah, I've had multiple people already make the remark that I should integrate it with Nemesis. So at some point I'll probably talk to Lee, Max, and Will to see what's possible. Could be fun. I definitely also see some use cases for red teams, right? I just want to restrict that public bit of it, but at some point I might silently build some features for our own team because I can see the value of it and hopefully they like it. So I'll figure out a way to keep it more important for blue than red. But all the query bits you can already use as a red teamer, and even some of the API connections that you'll probably get anyway.
I think the value proposition here would be add as much documentation as possible in order to how to get up and running with this, so that it is as easy for a company to do it themselves as if you were there helping them, or if I were hired in a case to help a company give better insight, I can recommend this and I can help them get this up and running, even though I'm not an expert blue teamer or like super understand the ins and outs of the tool. So
yeah, one of the things I'll probably do at some point as well is make some short YouTube videos into step by step how to implement this. That might be even easier, because writing documentation is something I'm not the best at, and probably forget the stuff that I assume that is easy for people anyway. So if making a video is also bypassing me forgetting stuff, but also hopefully fixing a bit where people don't read well, which is also a real case. A lot of the GitHub issues I've seen in the past were always people that didn't read the docs. So maybe videos are doing it better. I don't know.
It typically helps with the videos because you are sort of forced to sit down and go through it yourself. That's also where you identify gaps in documentation.
They also have to listen to me.
This wasn't inherent, right? This wasn't given. So no, I think that definitely helps out. I started a team filtration series of videos. My only recommendation would be to actually finish them, because I still haven't finished mine. But I think videos are definitely like again, you're lowering the wall you have to go through to learn this and start using it, right?
Yeah.
And people have so many.
It's probably also quicker for me to do. So it's like it works both ways.
Right. You started pretty well off right now, right? So demo is up, you talk to the tool, you're done.
Link to this.
Wrap it up, done. How to use.
Yeah, I think the hardest bit to get people to really start is to figure out. So I showed like what you do have to configure in terms of creds, and I wrote it down, in my opinion, quite well, but it's just showing somebody that doesn't do this a lot. It might make it easier.
I think that's like the setting it up with team filtration as well. The configuration is rather hideous to set up, because there's so many there's a few data points you have to connect to, and you have to get that account and do this and get that API key. And that's probably even more the case for you, where you actually have to get in, set up that registration, give the correct permissions, and then they have to get the API keys from the other services. Then you maybe have to confirm that they work and whatnot. So, but it's one of the things that once you get them up and running and they work, brilliant, and the value proposition starts coming in for it. I'm gonna fire the SR VPN giveaway in chat right now. So if you want to win a coupon code to get 1 month free SR VPN, check that out in chat. You already have a giveaway running, so let me just stop this other giveaway here, and then there we go. You have a total of 3 minutos to join that if anybody wants that one. Sadly, I'm running out of swag, but I'll try to beg some companies. Maybe Falcon Force could send some swag.
Yeah, we can send you.
Yes. Can't say no. I got you on stream. Can't say no now. So the pressure is there.
I'm happy to give them away. We have some cool shirts.
I'm happy to have stuff to give away as well.
Right now, but yeah, cool. I'll bring a big suitcase and give it to you at DEF CON, right? And good luck with getting it back. 100%. Oh, do you want that?
Yeah, that'd be sick.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect. Okay.
That'd be great. I'll leave stuff. I'll leave some space in my luggage for t-shirts then to give away.
Awesome.
Give free stuff.
I tend to travel hand luggage only always, but
to Vegas even. That's solid.
Yes. Yeah. Well, if you check in like a big backpack and like a carry-on, then it fits a lot. And in Vegas, you don't need sweaters and all kinds of other stuff. I usually bring one just to be safe, but.
The thing is that I absolutely pack every time, no matter where I'm going. 2 days,
there you go.
Pack way too much.
You don't need it. Yeah, exactly. And that's you also have to wait for that stupid suitcase, and you have to bring it to some desk. So you're queuing up way more. I don't like. I'm sort of impatient, so I don't like queuing. So if I can avoid a queue by being more practical, I will.
Okay, I think that's any questions or discussions points in chat. Obviously, again, Olaf will be at Troopers next week together with Durkian. So I guess everybody go bother Olaf and ask dumb questions. It's very important that you, like haggling is one of the most important things when people have talks. So I think one of the best things to do is when Olaf and Durkian is done, raise your hand and say, why didn't you do this? And then give them like a really good use case for this. Make them feel proper.
Yeah, make me feel dumb.
Use cases for attackers. I think we talked some about it where, yes, you could potentially use Cobalt Strike as a data collection point and then try to recreate some of this. But from an attacker's perspective, there might, like in the big sense of like attack paths, you might not have the data available, but like from a local perspective might be useful if you start going in deep on it. But yeah, I think again Nemesis might be the keyword there.
Most likely, yeah. And I mean, if you're into Go, you can probably fairly easily modify some of the APIs that I'm now talking to actually allow also access tokens where I now want app registration. So that's an easy thing because the SDK already supports it. So you just need to figure out like how to actually provide the token instead of the API creds that I give it. And then you can do a lot of the graph API stuff that I query. So like also this stuff, the app consent and the MFA settings and all these things. If you have the right permissions as a user, you can just use those with your access token. So that's probably something you can do. Yeah, and apart from that, you can use the Neo4j queries that I'm running. But if you don't have like new sessions and other ways of collecting it, then you still have a challenge there.
I think Scouts like had a pretty trolly point, but like as from an attacker's perspective, identifying the server, taking it over, and trolling.
Yeah, pwn it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah, if you can figure out a way. Yeah, if the blue team didn't set it up correctly and isolated this box, then that's going to be a treasure trove.
And
because
then you have
like
API
the full keys to the kingdom.
EDR solutions, you could potentially do something there, right?
If they didn't set it up well, yeah. And so I give people the instruction to use read-only permissions for everything, and ideally even different app registrations for each individual service. But yeah, if you pwn this box, then at least you have full visibility in everything. So you can also see probably the comments they make into the alerts they're investigating. So if they're investigating you, you can just keep tabs on what they're doing. I know that on multiple occasions, the guys in our red team also got access to Jira and just were watching what they were analyzing on them. Like, oh, they don't know this. Okay, we're safe. But yeah, that's the same here. And you can get way more because you can see basically where you should be going and how far along they are with tracking you.
And I mean, if the API keys are badly configured, that could be a really high value target in terms of using the... Yes. I think most EDR solutions have some sort of console, so you can do operations on the computer. I don't know what it's called, it's like recovery or what's it called?
Yeah, it's called differently everywhere. So in Defender for Endpoint, they call it live response. Where you get this basically a C2 and even Carbon Black had that. I think at some point.
I think CrowdStrike as well has something.
May have used that for.
So you could, if the API keys are probably misconfigured, you could probably use that to get code execution on servers and stuff. So even though it's probably set up, maybe consider that a high value asset for sure. Given the amount of data that's on it.
Yeah, there should be a box which only allows 80/80 in, maybe. So then you're only having a vulnerability in BloodHound that allows you access to the box, and the rest of the box should be very well shielded. It's basically a tier 0 asset in that sense.
Right. Let's do... Okay. I think that's going to be it. Any last minute questions, or I think we're going to call it. Thank you so much, Olaf, for joining stream. I really appreciate it. FalconHound is for sure a dope tool. Again, maybe not just this, maybe not ready for a use case that I might have for it yet, but I think for others could be great value, and I'll be sure to recommend modern enough blue teams to look at something like this, or companies that have people that can use it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
And then I'll see you in Vegas again. Be sure to bother Olaf in Troopers.
Yeah, at Troopers or in Vegas. Either way is fine. Twitter is also fine, but then I can ignore you, so that's easier.
Easier to ignore for sure. Okay, guys, thank you so much. I think we're gonna end it there. Have a great Radio Sunday. Have a great week, great Monday when that comes, and see you all next Sunday. We will have a surprise guest next Sunday as well. Next Sunday will all be all about phishing, so you can guess who I might have been able to fool get on the stream, and then we'll take it from there. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Let's see.